Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I want to talk about the rebalanced unique items that are coming out in Path of Exile Harvest. Now, this is not a definitive list of everything that's changing. GGG have teased 10 items today, out of about 50 that are going to get changed. When a unique item gets rebalanced, one of the things that it can do is create a reason to run an item that previously was sort of cool but never did anything useful. Maybe the item had stats that were too low to ever consider using. And while some of these items can look promising but not really get there, like the weapon Rebuke of the Vaal, which was updated a couple of leagues ago, often they can set people's minds working on new possible builds. And some of these builds work out, and some of the items become really popular, widely used. However, in addition to the rebalances to unique items, there was also this little change that was added as well, that may have flown under the radar a bit because it was only really spoken about on Reddit. Thunderous Salvos is a node that exists on the passive tree at the moment, but is disconnected, and the only way to get get its benefits on your character is to anoint it. From memory, it's also 2 gold oils to anoint. So it's one that you can't get access to early in the league at all. And then once you've got a bit of currency behind you, yeah, you can anoint it, but there's no way to connect to it. And of course, using your anoint on it means that there's a lot of other powerful options that you can't anoint. So if you're not near Constitution, you can't anoint Constitution. If you're not near Solar Steel, it's a choice, Solar Steel or Thunderous Salvos. Now you're going to be able to have a new choice. You can just connect to Thunderous Salvos like any other node on the passive tree, and it connects through these seal generation speed nodes, which are not too bad either. I think this is a welcome change. Unleash is a support gem that I really like, and this is going to be a modest buff to it. So I'm happy with that. But you came here for the unique items, so let's get back to them. These vary. Some of these are going to be hits, some of them are going to be misses. I want to start with 2 items that were boss drops a long time ago back in Talisman League, and they are Rigwald's Savagery and Rigwald's Command. These are the new versions. So Rigwald is a dual wield character and 1 axe and 1 sword, and that is what these 2 weapons support. There's not that much support on the passive tree for mixing and matching weapons in general. However, cluster jewels do address this a little bit. And Rigwald's Savagery is an axe that grants benefits to your character if you are using a sword. Rigwald's Command is a sword that grants benefits to your character if you are using an axe. However, these benefits have been changed completely. Now these benefits deal with the rage mechanic. So, Rigwald's Savagery is losing a little bit of damage and is gaining plus 25 to maximum rage when you are wielding a sword. So you're going to need to use Rigwald's Savagery plus Rigwald's Command to get this, or potentially plus a different sword. But 25 maximum rage is a lot, especially if you're playing a Berserker, where Berserkers have the ability to take nodes on their tree, which increases, in fact, doubles the effect of rage. Doubles, maybe it's triples. It massively amps up the effect of rage on your character. So, with Rigwald's Savagery, you will need to attack an enemy for some time in order to build up rage. But during ordinary mapping, you'll probably stay at or close to full rage once you get there. In protracted boss fights, unless there are long periods where you're unable to interact with anything, cough Cirrus, you will be able to maintain full rage for the entire encounter, except briefly when you must drop everything and dodge some attack. So for instance, against the Shaper, you will see your rage meter decay tremendously during his bullet hell phase when you've got nothing to hit, but throughout the rest of the fight, you'll be able to keep beating on the Shaper, regaining your rage, and once you've got it, you'll keep it except for the periods of bullet hell. So, an increase of maximum rage is huge. This is a fairly powerful item, but I don't think it's extraordinarily so. I think that its low base damage is still enough to keep the weapon out of widespread use. However, I think people will definitely try to make the meme build work. Rigwald's Command is the other side of this equation, and it's gained a very powerful bleed buff, potentially as much as 75% to damage over time multiplier for bleeding, but only conditional upon you wielding an axe. I think there's almost enough synergy here. There's enough synergy here to make a reasonable build, but I don't think there's enough synergy to make a great one. I will point out, though, that there are some cluster jewels that really powerfully augment such a strategy, ones that have benefits for axes and for swords, and that also have very powerful Impale theme nodes on them, as well as Devastator, which causes some juicy explosions. If you do decide to go down this route, you'll want to roll large cluster jewels that are the axe and sword augmenters, using jagged fossils, potentially, in order to get those juicy physical nodes to be more common. Next up we have Broken Faith. Broken Faith is an interesting shield in that it focuses on, rather than protecting you, although it sort of does that a little bit, it gives up a lot of defensive power even over a normal shield, and then grants you some leech, and additionally the powerful Unholy Might buff, and Profane Ground. Profane Ground is a new mechanic, and it's going to be this is going to be one of those things where there are so many of these mechanics that are specific to unique items that players will need to look up. It's going to be another reason to go and look up the PoE wiki. So, what do we have here? We have a shield with no life, with reduced block chance, with a little bit of elemental resistances as it's implicit. But then it has the interesting mods. Plus 100% increased global armor when you have no energy shield. You have Unholy Might while you have no energy shield. So these provide you with a powerful reason to stay at 0 ES. Unfortunately, the shield itself provides you with some ES, so you'll see that it has its baseline 32 energy shield. That's important. If it had none, you could probably build your character around having absolutely no ES at all, from none from any source, and then you're both always at full ES and always at empty ES. That's not an option. You're either at full or you're at empty, and you're going to need to find ways to burn up your ES as quickly as it comes in. If you do, though, you'll be rewarded with Unholy Might, which is a buff that grants 30% of physical damage that you deal as additional chaos damage. Keep in mind also that you're getting Chaos Leech here, so that's going to help restore your health as you start taking a bit of a beating. If this is useful, and I kind of don't think it will be, but if it is useful in any sort of meta build, I've got a feeling that it has quite a lot of synergy, potentially with some sort of Cobra Lash and Claw type shenanigans. So you'll be gaining lots of life off your Cobra Lash hits with Claws giving you life gain on hit. You'll be leeching, and you'll have a lot of poison, ability to stack poison. That's one of the ways I'd be thinking about building this. You could also ensure that you're never at full energy shield, or even that your energy shield never exceeds 1, by using the skill Blood Rage, which is a powerful offensive buff, but also provides you the interesting effect of continually dealing a small but meaningful amount of physical damage over time to you. So that's one of the ways that I'd think about doing this. The other thing is just having increased global armor on this. Armor is an underrated stat by a lot of players, but you can get quite a lot of it, and it provides meaningful defense against medium-sized and small-sized hits. So the small hits that you suffer from exploding porcupines will basically be nothing with Broken Faith and a little bit of armor. Medium-sized hits that you might take from a critical strike from a white monster, or from a regular hit from a powerful rare monster, or a non-telegraphed hit from a boss monster. Those sorts of hits will be mitigated considerably by a decent amount of armor. On the flip side, massive physical hits, telegraph boss hits, for instance, like the Shaper's Slam or the Minotaur's Slam, those will deal almost full damage through even armor in the many tens of thousands. But the other thing that's important with armor is that it will amp up the skill Molten Shell. So there's lots of uses for this shield. As I say, I don't think it's going to get there, but I'm very open to being proven wrong. Next up we have Ungol's Harmony. Ungol's Harmony is an amulet that has not been very good for a long time. It's also a pretty common drop, and it's getting doubled down on in terms of what it does. So the current version grants you a considerable buff to critical strike chance at the expense of reducing your critical strike multiplier by 25%. For most builds, this is not a trade-off that is worth paying your entire amulet slot for. And the design direction that this is going in is really doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on that. Instead of providing up to 100% increased global critical strike chance, it's now going to 350% at the top end. So this means that if you've got a baseline critical strike chance of 6%, then suddenly that's going to increase by 21%. So if, for instance, you've got a 6% base crit skill, and you've got a few other sources on your character that grant 100% increased critical strike chance, your critical strike chance before this amulet is 12%. That's going to go up to 33%. That's a big jump. However, your critical strikes do not deal extra damage. What's a critical strike good for if it's not dealing extra damage, you ask? There's two main things. The first one is to inflict freezes, shocks, and chills. Freezes, shocks, chills, and ignites. The second one, though, that I think is worth remembering is Elemental Overload. Elemental Overload is a really good keystone, and it is something that can give you 40% more elemental damage, but at two major costs. The first major cost is that it only turns on if you've done a critical strike in the last 8 seconds, and the second one is that you have no critical strike multiplier. So there's considerable drawbacks to this skill. To this keystone, but they do synergize a lot with Ungol's Harmony. All of this said, I think that the opportunity cost of giving up one of the most powerful damage dealing slots in the entire game for Ungol's Harmony is just too high. This is not used at the moment by pretty much anyone, any meta players, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. You want more life than this on an amulet. You want more resistances than this on an amulet if you can't get powerful offenses, but you can get much better offensive stat combinations than are available on Ungol's Harmony. So this one's a hard pass from me, but of course, by all means, feel free to try and build around it and prove me wrong. The Blood Dance is really good. I want to come back to it in a sec because it's the one I'm the most excited about. Wildfire is transformative. Wildfire has gone from a from a jewel that you used to need to run 2 of when you were allowed to run 2 if you were playing the Molten Strike skill. Molten Strike felt terrible until you got 2 copies of this jewel. Then you got 2 copies of it and it started feeling alright. Now I played it back in Delve. That was the way that it played back then. Since then, the Wildfire jewel was changed to only allow 1, and Molten Strike underwent somewhat of an overhaul in the Legion expansion. It hasn't been popular since, and this is essentially a second attempt to overhaul the skill. So, Wildfire is going from being a mandatory must-use, whatever you do, you must socket 2 of these in your tree, or one more recently, to something that is going to be a transformation of the skill rather than a mandatory bit of power for it. And what it's going to do now is cause Molten Strike projectiles to chain 1 more time, so that's going from 0 to 1 by default, but you can find other sources of chain on gear and the like. And it's also going to cause Molten Strike projectiles to chain on impacting the ground. Now, there's certainly a part of me that is interested in seeing what happens if you were to link Molten Strike to Awakened Chain support at this point, and socket Wildfire. I think that could be a pretty screen melting experience, especially if you're attacking really fast. However, the drawback for this is that Molten Strike will fire 50% less projectiles. So there's a big benefit and a big drawback to this duel, which is the way it should be. I'm inclined to think that it will be popular to use on Molten Strike builds if Molten Strike is popular, and so would certainly suggest people that if you're playing Molten Strike, that you do buy one of these as soon as you can. It may be available from the Act 5 quest that awards a lot of threshold jewels. We'll have to find that out, and that you experiment with it, see how it feels. Next up we have Uul-Netol's Embrace. This is an interesting axe. This has very high base damage. Very, very high base damage. And oh my god, does it hit slowly. 0.86 attacks per second. That's one of the slowest in the entire game. 25% reduced attack speed. But you get a powerful benefit for putting up with this low attack speed. And that is the combination of things related to bleeding enemies. So attacks have a 25% chance to inflict bleeding when hitting cursed enemies. It's probably easy enough to get a 100% chance to bleed without that. So that's probably not all that important a line, but it is there if you just want to use the axe on its own without heavy investment. But the big one is this trigger level 20 Bone Nova when you hit a bleeding enemy. Bone Nova is its own skill. It only exists through this item. And what it does is it fires an attack, a projectile attack, in a Nova around you. 8 little shards fly off, as you can see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they will go and hit enemies. This Bone Nova is augmented by all socketed support gems. So all support gems that are socketed into this axe will empower this Bone Nova. And that means that this Bone Nova can do a lot of damage. It's something that can gain 6... So you're gaining, with your primary attack, you're hitting the enemy, and then sort of for free, you're getting this additional 7 link that is firing off. So there's a lot of potential for this axe. I can see 2 real ways to maybe try building around this. The first one is to deal physical damage only and scale via things like Pride, as is commonly done on Impale characters. Uul-Netol's Embrace you'll use with a slow attack skill, something like Earthquake or Ground Slam, which will hit enemies that are near you. And when you hit an enemy that was already bleeding, you'll fire off Bone Nova projectiles, which will hit other enemies off the screen. So that's the first option. The second one that I think is worth at least thinking about is maybe trying to convert most, but not quite 100% of the damage away from physical towards an element. You could convert, say, 98% through the use of gloves. So you would have a skill that you're swinging with a skill that converts 50% by default, and then you use gloves that can convert another 25 or so. That can convert 25 is the maximum, but you can go a little bit less than that. Lots of options there to convert a whole lot of the damage into an element, and then focus on scaling that element. Ideally, you'd be converting to lightning, because inside the actual Uul-Netol's Embrace, you'll then use physical to lightning support as well. So all of this in mind, these are some various options I've been thinking of. I'm not sure how good this will be. I'm keen to try it out though, just by virtue of the fact that it's a way to project damage with a two-handed weapon. It's a way to attack something close to you and project damage miles and miles away from you. That appeals to me, whether the actual item is good or not. We'll have to see how it goes. So, that's something I'm interested to see how it functions. I'm not sure. Hotfooted is next. Hotfooted is going from being a total waste of a unique jewel. So currently it just provides the movement speed buff while ignited. It's long been a saying that if you light a man a fire, be warm for a night. If you light a man on fire, be warm for the rest of his life. And Hotfooted lets you put that to the test by seeing just how fast you can run and act while you're on fire. If you can find a way to ignite yourself reliably, and there are a few in the game, then this jewel will pay you off for it. I think the opportunity cost is probably too high, given that you can only use one of these. But I'm sure that someone, cough cough, salutations Exile, as Juices would say, will find a use for this. Side note, if you've never seen Juices' builds, definitely have a look at them. The guy's an absolute legend. He posts videos on YouTube where he will take the zaniest and most ridiculous combinations of skills that you can think of, and a lot of his builds are focused around making the game cast spells for you via a whole lot of complicated loops. They're a lot of fun to watch, and I highly recommend them. he will be sure to find a use for Hotfooted. Brain Rattler is next. Brain Rattler is interesting. The first thing that you might not notice about this is that there has been a change to the implicit modifier on the meat grinder. So instead of being a buff to stuns, instead it's a 5% chance to deal double damage. This is nice for two reasons. Firstly, that is actually indirectly a buff to stuns, because when you hit an enemy and deal double damage, that's more likely to be a stun. Secondly, it's more damage, and damage is good. Enemies that you have killed, you don't need to worry about whether they're stunned or not. It's like you've stunned them forever, they don't get back up, they don't hit you back. So, that's a really solid new implicit, and I'm happy to see that on maces in general. At least on two-handed maces. I don't know if it's going to be on one-handed maces, I don't know if it's going to be on every two-handed mace, but it's on the meat grinder base. So this deals a shitload of physical damage, then converts that to lightning. And then once it converts to lightning, there's a huge chance to shock, penetration of lightning resistance, and punishments for enemies that are being shocked by these attacks. This is a really compelling build-around unique. So currently it drops from the Minotaur, the Guardian of the Minotaur, and that means that supply of this will be pretty low early in the new league. Keep that in mind if you're thinking of building around it. However, it's just going to deal an ungodly amount of damage. I'm really keen to give this a try. I'm not sure if it's going to get there or not, but it does do a lot of damage. And I'm kind of tempted to see, can it be made to work? It is still a slow attacker. 1.25 attacks per second can feel slow and clunky, but when you're hitting enemies and shocking massive enemies, shocking things like Uber-Elder or the Shaper or Cirrus, and then dealing more damage to them afterwards with your subsequent hits and consequentially bigger and bigger shocks, Brain Rattler seems pretty compelling to use. Second last, we have the Dark Seer. This is a weapon that I feel has just gone a little bit too weird. So we've got increased global damage, which is really nice. It scales some things that are very hard to scale by other means. However, 56% isn't a monumental amount of increased damage. It's solid, but it's not extraordinary. There may be a skill that is very hard to scale that someone finds the Dark Seer to be the best way to do it. Broadly speaking, I think that the spiritual aid cluster, which grants you the ability for you personally to benefit your personal damage to benefit from minion nodes, that tends to be a better way to scale those hard to scale skills than using an item like the Dark Seer. There's a number of blind shenanigans with it. 10% global chance to blind enemies on hit is very good with skills that hit fast and frequently. Ball Lightning comes to mind as a skill that deals a lot of very small packets of damage. It's very likely to blind things. So that's a powerful use for the Dark Seer. Then we have these really interesting lines about you being blinded. If you're blinded, that doesn't affect your chance to hit. And while you are blinded, enemies blinded by you have malediction. If you're not sure what malediction is, and you have to look it up, don't be ashamed of that. I had to look it up too. It's both the name of an occultist node and also a temporary debuff, that is provided to enemies by that occultist node. But the malediction debuff on cursed enemies applies the following: 10% reduced damage dealt, 10% increased damage taken. That's a very powerful, very, very powerful effect to put on an enemy. And it's something that you require to be blinded yourself to do. The easiest way to get blinded yourself is by using the Timeless Jewel that does that. Additionally, you will receive one maximum energy shield per character level, so 90 energy shield and 90 maximum mana at level 90, and 100 if you actually go as far as level 100. So all in all, this is a reasonably interesting scepter, but I think there's just so much messing around necessary to get its key benefits, and I'm not sure that you wouldn't be better off just putting that investment into scaling things via other means. So let's jump back to the Blood Dance now. This is a powerful item, but it's one that's in an inventory slot that has been let's just say has encountered some increasing competition in power in recent leagues. Boots have been power creeped to a level that is incredible. If we think back to what was the best boots possible in the game back in the Synthesis League, it was boots with permanent onslaught and as an implicit, plus a couple of other implicits. And then really it was just movement speed, life, resist, and maybe an abyssal socket if you were really rich. That was what top tier boots looked like back then. Nowadays, you have the ability to gain elusive on critical strike on boots. Tailwind, conditional tailwind is incredibly powerful. Additionally, cooldown reduction, which actually was available back in Synthesis as well. There's lots of really powerful mods that boots can roll. As a result, for uniques to be competitive, they need to be better than they used to be. Enter the Blood Dance. This is an item that gives you a huge payoff if you stack frenzy charges on your character. There are two main ways that people stack frenzy charges. The first one is by being a raider, and the second one is by being an assassin, stacking power charges, and then using Badge of the Brotherhood to cause all of those power charges that you've stacked to also grant you additional maximum frenzy charges. The key line here being your maximum frenzy charges is equal to your maximum power charges. So if you've stacked up 8 power charges somehow, then this unique amulet, which I will add in is very, very, very rare and very expensive in a lot of leagues, this unique amulet will power you up to 8 maximum frenzy charges. So with that in mind, and with me having just managed to pause the video in time to have a coughing fit, let's come back to what the Blood Dance will pay you off as your reward for stacking these frenzy charges. So, let's read what the item does if you have 7 as your maximum frenzy charges. Combining the second and third lines, we're getting 34% increased movement speed. That's pretty good. 35% is typical on a set of high quality endgame boots, and 30 for earlier endgame boots. So that's pretty nice. We then have 4% reduced attack and cast speed per frenzy charge. Frenzy's charges give you 4% increased attack and cast speed by default. So essentially this is turning down the default power level of your frenzy charges. It's okay though, you'll still keep the 4% more damage per frenzy charge. Then we have regenerate 0.8% of life per second per frenzy charge. So that is going to be 5.6% of life per second when you're at max frenzy charges. This makes sustaining Blood Rage a breeze should you decide to go down that route for generating your frenzy charges, which you may well want to do because Blood Rage is really good. And also it just provides a nice additional recovery layer that can augment other methods of regenerating life, like Life Leech. Then we have 22% chance to gain a frenzy charge when you kill an enemy. This is nice, but the big line is the last one. 28% increased damage per frenzy charge with hits against enemies that are on low life. So, this apparently can roll as high as 30%. So this means that you've got 210% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. Enemies are on low life if they're at 35% of their maximum health or lower. So against a fight in a fight that goes for a long time, this is essentially about equivalent to having 66% increased 66% increased damage. This is based on you having 7 frenzy charges. If you can stack more, if you can stack 9, then it's going to be even better. So that's the first thing to think of. But then you also want to consider that there's a number of bosses in the game where the most dangerous phase of the fight is when they're on very low health. So let's take, for instance, the Uber Elder encounter. During this fight, firstly you fight the Shaper and the Elder when they're at 100% health, whittle them both down to 75. When they get to 75%, they unlock some more of their abilities. Then again, you get them to 50%, and they've unlocked a few more abilities. During this entire time, the Shaper is creating permanent, enduring zones of cold damage over time on the ground. Additionally, the Elder is summoning Madness Propagators, who will put their own type of crap on the ground. these puddles of gunk do not disappear. And so this means that the longer that the fight progresses, the more dangerous the arena itself becomes. As well as that, the longer that the fight progresses, the more dangerous the two bosses get. Then you get them once you get them to 50%, then this is going to start kicking in pretty soon. You'll knock them down to 25% each, and from then on, you've always got this extra damage bonus. So, whilst these boots are not giving you any extra damage at the start of the fight when you don't really need it, at the end of the fight when you do, they're giving you an enormous damage boost. The same is true on Cirrus. Cirrus regenerates to a sizable chunk of health for the final phase, but it's not 100%. And so the final phase of the fight is you're going against Cirrus. You've got this for more than just 35% of the encounter. The last one that I'd name, and we've been talking about sort of ultra endgame bosses, some of the hardest content in the game, but these boots are going to serve you well on some easier content as well. One of the most important milestones in your character's progression once you get out of maps is killing Azaro first in the Merciless Labyrinth and then in the Eternal Labyrinth, where he's a lot harder. And these Blood Dance boots, the third fight against Azaro, he starts at low life. He starts that encounter at low life. He's at low life the whole fight. So these boots are going to provide you with a great boost during that fight. And that's one where you really need it because it's the third fight where the arena has traps. It's the third fight where potentially you're facing two of the hard modes if you haven't turned them off from earlier in the labyrinth. So for that reason, it's better than just giving you 1/3 of this benefit as extra damage all the time, because it comes up in final phases of boss fights. So for that reason, I think that the Blood Dance is one of the most exciting of the uniques here. If your character is able to pick up Tailwind by some other means, such as by being a Deadeye, or maybe there'll be other ways to get it other than by giving up your boot slot, then in that case, I think the Blood Dance is going to be a really compelling unique to use on a lot of characters. Anyone that can stack a few frenzy charges is going to want to seriously consider this. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what people do with this unique. I think it's going to be really, really solid. Anyways, that's all of the new unique items and the little extra mention of the passive tree change that's coming. I'm going to continue putting out stuff about the changes that are announced for the Harvest League, but if you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.